Let us have the talk from Dr.Ileana Citaristi, and Dr.Ileana Citaristi's introduction. Dr.Ileana Citaristi is an Italian-born Odissi and show dancer, guru and choreographer based in Bhubaneswar, India since 1979. Dr. Citaristi is the author of 5 books: The Making of a Guru, Kelucharan Mahapatra, His Life and Times, Traditional Martial Practices in Orissa, and My Journey, A Tale of Two Births, Odissi and the Gita Govinda, and the Traditional Martial Dances of India. She is imparting training in Odissi and Shaw dance in her own institution, Art Vision, in Bhubaneswar, founded by her in 1996. Now we'll watch the video recorded talk of Dr. Ileana Citaristi.
Namaskar. I am going to talk about the Devadasi of the Jagannath temple. The material which I have collected for the presentation is mostly been collected by me from one of the last Devadasi, which were alive still in the last century. I was in touch with her in 1981-82. So, and of course, correlated by other our information from books and all these things, but mainly regarding the rituals which they used to observe in the temple of Lord Jagannath. She was one of my main informer. Some of the rituals were almost all the rituals at that time in the 80s had already been terminated, but in her young age, some of them were still there. So let me start with few legends. According to one legend, once upon a time, a beautiful damsel by the name of Urvashi was dancing at the court of Indra in front of an august audience, which included the powerful sage Agastya. While dancing, Urvashi exchanged amorous glances with a prince named Jayanta and missed a step. The sage, who noticed the exchange, condemned them to be born on earth, Urvashi as a Devadasi and Jayanta as a bamboo tree. After being pleaded for forgiveness, the sage conceded to lift the curse from the moment she would dedicate herself to the service in the temple, and consequently, Jayanta would become the rod presented to her at the time of her performance. In another legend, which we find in the Madala Panji, which are the temple chronicle of Jagannath temple, states that when gods and other celestial beings attended the ceremony of the Pratishta, or installation of the deity at the Jagannath temple in Puri, the celestial party included Gandharvas and Apsaras, singers and dancers. The ravishing damsels Ramba and Menaka danced on the occasion, accompanied by the music of their celestial companions, Aha and Huhu. Ramba and Menaka, on the basis of these legends, are considered the first Devadasi to have danced for Jagannath. A third legend, we can say that in another legend, it says that once upon a time, the king of Puri, during one of his visits to the temple, found the clothes of Jagannath dust-ridden. On inquiry from the Sevaka, he learned that the previous night Jagannath had been to a certain grove to listen to the Gita Govinda sang by a female dancer, and he appreciated a lot. The king immediately decided to appoint the dancer for the entertainment of the Lord at the time of his meals. So from the above 3 legends, we can already infer 3 basic features attached to the function of the temple dancers: their role as entertainer, the strictness with which they were supposed to deliver their duty, and the special relation they were enjoying with the divinity. If we go and see some historical references, one of the earlier inscriptions, which gives us some information about dedication of temple dancers, is the one attached to the Brahmeshwar temple at Bhubaneswar. The inscription, besides giving a clear statement that the temple was built by Kolavati Devi, mother of King Udyota Kesari of the Somavansi dynasty in the 18th regnal year of the latter, is approximately around 1050 AD, specifically mentions about the dedication of beautiful women adorned with ornaments set in gems and whose eyes were fickle and extended up to the ears for the worship of Lord Shiva. During the reign of Rajaraja II, 1170 and 1190 AD, his son-in-law, Swapneshwar Deva, built a Megashwar temple in honor of Shiva. An inscription in this temple, which during the English rule was erroneously placed in the compound of the Ananta Vasudeva temple, testifies of the appointment of dancing girls who are described as having gaits which bring about a complete stillness in the activities of the three worlds, and having bangles of precious stones which serve as candles during the dances. The Ananta Vasudeva temple at Bhubaneswar was constructed by Kolavati Devi, daughter of Ananga Bhimadeva III, in the year 1278. During the reign of Kavi Narasimhadeva, the king who started the practice of the singing of Gita Govinda in the temple of Lord Jagannath. So let me. Kolavati had been given in marriage to a general of the Ayahaya dynasty who was killed in war. After becoming a widow, she dedicated herself to the worship of Lord Vishnu. From the inscription which was attached to the temple and which is now in the Royal Asiatic Society in London, we come to know that she was highly adept in music and dance. She had the radiant beauty of the moon and was fervently devoted to Lord Vishnu since her childhood. The temple dances attached to Jagannath temple came to be known as Mahari, a term which, according to some, derives from the word Maharani, queen, and by others from Mahanagri or Mahanari, great women. Nari, women, Mahanari. According to others, the word is related to Maharalaka, the word or area of existence beyond Swarga, whose inhabitants are called Mahara, and in feminine gender, Mahari. There was no any particular restriction regarding their caste, although at the time of dedication to the service, a sort of inquiry was made from the part of the king to assess that the girl would not belong to lower caste or Harijans. The initiation ceremony was done in two phases. The first was done in the temple before the attainment of the puberty, with a symbolic marriage ritual to Lord Jagannath, and the second after reaching puberty at the king palace, where she would spend her first night with the king, considered to be the moving image of Lord Jagannath. The Mahari, being married to God, had the fortune to never become a widow, and for this they were considered auspicious and carriers of good fortune. Special songs called Mangala Gita, auspicious songs, were sang by them and only by them at the birth and thread ceremonies and marriage functions in the house of the king and of the high caste families of Puri. And soil from a Mahari house was taken as a good omen at the commencement of a new construction work. In spite of it, the Mahari were not allowed to enter into the Sanctum Sanctorum, Garbhagriha of the temple, where even casual visitors have access in particular hours of the day. And in case this would happen, the place would have to be purified before rituals could be resumed. Even those belonging to the Bittere Gahani category who had the privilege to entertain the Lord between the evening meal and his ornamentation for the night, were performing their duty at the threshold of the inner enclosure and not inside. The double stigma of being considered at the same time apsaras and concubine, goddess and Vaishya, wives and servants, is what rendered ladies fascinating and intriguing figures, capable of attracting praise and condemnation in equal measures. What started as a way of celebration for gods in the Satya Yuga gradually became a shameful profession in the Kali Yuga. But the art which they carried forward survived. All of them may have not been equally proficient in the art of dance and music, since in many cases, the criteria for becoming a temple dancer was not based on their artistic aptitude, but on more practical and economic consideration. Most of them belonged to poor families and were adopted by the older Mahari to be able to carry on with their rights to pursue the particular Shiva assigned to them. In some cases, the girls were voluntarily handed over by their natural parents for fulfilling a vow made to Jagannath. From being hailed as goddesses and being surrounded by praises and adoring followers, to becoming ashamed and having to hide to be one of the dedicated servants to the Lord, is the pathetic story of these women. Even before the promulgation of the Prevention of Dedication of Devadasi Act came into vigor in 1947, in Odisha, the dance of the Mahari in the temple of Jagannath had already been discontinued. Only the singing at the time of Bodhasingaradupa in the evening was still carried on by the last representative of the Pittaregahani category. So I think I will go to the rituals. Social stigma, before that, social stigma along with economic hardships had compelled all of them to sell their rights to the Shiva and to marry or find some other profession. The renovated interest in the society towards the revival of the dance form, which they had practiced, didn't bring any benefit to their condition, since they were kept out from the process of reconstruction of the art form. Around 10 of them in the middle of the last century formed a Devadasi Samiti with the purpose of establishing a school of music and dance where they could carry on the teaching of their art, but without any help either from the revitalists or the government. They were unable to carry on with the project. The school called Mahari Nrutya Vidyalaya Sangit, with 2 faculties of Odissi Gita and Mahari Nrutya, could continue only for 3 years, mostly on the basis of money collected from different sources, and after being denied grants from the Orissa Sanginataka Academy, had to close down. So now let us talk about a little bit the rituals. The ritual of dedication of a new girl to the service took place usually when she was 9 or 10 years old. The ceremony marking her consecration had all the characteristics of a marriage ritual, as is usually performed in Orissa. In this case, the bridegroom was the Lord himself, and the ceremony took place in the temple, the house of the Lord. After receiving Diksha, the sacred mantra from the spiritual guru, the girl was accompanied to the temple by the elder Maharis. Here, the typical features of marriage ceremony were officiated by Patyoshi Mahapatra, who among the priests was in charge of controlling the performances of all the Shivakas. It was a simple ceremony and included exchange of garlands, tying of the sari around the head, application of red powder and sandalwood paste on the girl's forehead, circumambulation of the temple, holding unparched rice and betel nuts, and back home, a ritual in front of the Tulsi plant, wearing a new dress, bangles, and decorations, and distribution of food to Brahmins, relatives, and other invitees. In the evening, the young bride was taken to the palace of the Puri king by her mother and other female relatives, and was asked to sit near him. She was subsequently taken to his bedchamber and asked to touch the bed and then look into the eyes of the king, which is called Chakya Milana, or meeting of the eyes. We have already mentioned how this was followed by another meeting with the king after the girl reached puberty. The rituals in the temple have undertaken changes along the century in terms of addition, expansion, and alteration according to the different royal dynasties and historical situation. Regarding the services by the Mahari, we have to depend upon what information the last surviving ones were willing to divulge when contacted by the different scholars in the last century. Odisha, by this time, had gone through centuries of invasion of foreign powers, which had had considerable consequences on the management of the temple in general, and in particular on the participation of the Mahari to the different Shiva. Moreover, beside the description of the ritual as such, one has to take in consideration the different religious faiths which have been assimilated by the highly syncretic cult of Lord Jagannath, such as Brahmanism, Vaishnavism, Shivaism, and Shaktism. Although from the 12th century onward, the Vaishnava cult became the prominent one, elements from other faiths too have influenced the way different rituals were interpreted and understood. Broadly, the service of the Mahari can be divided into 4 types of activities. Occasions when they had only to sing, then when they had to dance without song, when they had to dance along with singing, and when they had to portray certain dramatic actions or interpret certain characters. So, Nritya and Natya. Nritya is dance without song, and Nritya is singing and dancing together, and Natya is the dramatic action. Often, more than one activity was performed during the same ritual. From an inscription of the year 1499 attributed to King Prataparudradeva, we come to know that the Mahari were supposed to dance and sing daily in the temple during the evening meal of the Lord, and they should dance and sing only to the tune of the Gita Govinda songs. If this was the type of Shiva performed at one point of time, along the century it was undertaken considerable changes. What we can gather from the witnesses, scholars, and the Mahari of the last century is that the Sakala Dhupa Shiva, by the beginning of the last century, Sakala Dhupa is the dance which they were performing during the time of the morning meal of the deity, consisted only of sequences of rhythmic dance performed by a single Mahari, accompanied by the sound of drum and cymbals. And the Shiva at the time of Bodhasigara Dhupa, which is the evening one, consisted only of songs from the Gita Govinda without dance. The daily morning ritual of Sakala Dhupa could be performed by the Mahari even before reaching puberty, after a year or so of training given by the adoptive or natural mother, her spiritual guru, and the Mardeli or drummer. Keeping in view all the instruction for the purity of body and mind to be maintained on the day of the Shiva, the Mahari would reach the temple and start the dance at the time when, with the door of the sanctum closed, the offering of the food began and terminated at the end of the Karpura Alati, offering of camphor lamps, which was performed with the doors of the sanctum open upon completion of the meat service. The duration of the dance depended on the length of the puja every day. The performance usually consisted of nritta, rhythmic dance, accompanied by the sound of the pakavaj, without any melody or utterance of words, rhythmic syllables. The dancer facing the south direction would have Jagannath on the right side and the Rajguru, which is representative of the king, standing near the Garuda Stamba with the golden cane, symbol of the royal authority, on their left. And she would start the dance by executing a double turn to be able to offer obeisance, first to the god and then the king. The devotees present would stand and watch from the side. According to a manuscript of the 18th century called Devadasi Nritya Karika, written by Lavanya Mahari, is written the dance full of calm and truly the absorbed attitude starts They dance by performing a triple salutation with folded hands, first in front of the ark, second at the head, and third near the feet of the Lord. The space for the dance was quite minimal, and therefore one can presume that the dance consisted more of poses than movement in different directions. According to the Shakta interpretation of the puja, this dance by the Mahari would correspond to the fifth S of the tantric panchamakaras, 5 substances, that is the maituna, the sexual union. According to this tradition, this morning puja is called Kali Uchista, living of Kali, referring to the drops of female sexual fluid secreted from the vagina of the dancer as a result of the movements performed during the dance. According to the information collected by me during my interaction with Harapriya Devi in the early 1980s, she did mention about some bhanda or acrobatic poses among the 64 bhanda of the Kama Sutra, which the Mahari were performing during the Tantric Panchamakara Puja, but she said that this used to be performed in the evening before the singing of the Gita Govinda, and that this puja had been abolished at the beginning of the 18th century. The evening Shiva was performed only by the Mahari belonging to the Vitarika category. They could start performing this only after reaching puberty. According to the instruction found in the inscription, according to the inscription found in the instruction found in the inscription of Prataparudra Deva, the dance and the singing of the Gita Govinda was supposed to be from the end of the evening dupa up to the time of the Bodha Singara dupa. This is the time when the deities are being dressed in silken garments, with verses of Gita Govinda written on it. Sandal paste is applied to them, and they are decorated with a variety of scented flowers and tulsi garlands. The singing of the Gita Govinda by the Mahari, who is standing on the threshold of the sanctum, continues all through until the lights are extinguished. Everybody leaves the temple, and after uttering Manima Manima, royal epithet to Lord Jagannath, the Talicho Bhavapatra closes and locks the door. It is difficult to uncertain when dance was omitted from the ritual, but Harapriya told me that it was done until the beginning of the last century. Besides the dance, it seems there used to be also recitation of the Gita Govinda accompanied by the sound of the veena and other musical instruments at the time of the Chandanalagi, since the Vinakara is listed as one of the Chotisha Nijoga, or 36 categories of servants employed in this temple. The singing of the Gita Govinda by this special category of Mahari before the Lord retires for the night underlies the intimate association enjoyed by them in connection with deity. Besides intimacy, it also suggests secrecy, relationship bordering with erotic elements, and absence of inhibition. When this ritual was narrated to me, my informant said that the singing of this Sringara Rasa poem was done by the Mahari, breast naked, with her blouse tied around her waist, and it would continue until the eyes of Jagannath started closing, the garland of flowers started withering, and the voice of the singer started waning. As much as the description may appear a little romanticized, still it gives the ideas of the overall atmosphere surrounding this ritual and the secret and exclusive role the Mahari were enjoying in their relation with Jagannath. So I don't think I'll have enough time to go through the different rituals along the liturgical year, which was the Chandan Jatra, Rukmini Vibaha, Ekadasi, and then of course the Snano Purnima, Ratha Yatra. So these are all the major festival in which, as I said, the Mahari had different roles. Sometime, like in the Chandan Jatra, they were on the boat which was bringing Jagannath around in the Narendra tank. They were singing and singing themselves and making the gesture and doing a not too much, not rhythmic dance much, but abhinaya. So we can call that nritya. And then sometimes they were impersonating different characters or taking the role of Lakshmi during the Rath Yatra, like when Lakshmi is offended and angry because Jagannath is left her behind. So they sing and enact her feelings. So, and then they have to, for example, in Nanda Uchava, when the birth of Sri Krishna is depicted, they will take the role of Jasoda. And so all these are a different function which they were having during the different festival during the year. And so I think I can escape all this. Maybe go to their technique and style, which we don't know much about this, but is important since the presentation was saying it was titled the Mahari of the Lord of the Temple of Jagannath, Precursor of Music and Odissi Music and Dance. So we have already seen how the Mahari, through their Sheva in the form of dancing and singing, discharge different roles in the rituals. And their relation with the deity, although being officially that of a wife, assume a variety of shades and turn at times into that of a mother, a playmate, a temptress, or a mistress. The main rasa underlying all these roles is the Shringara rasa in the form of bhaktis or devotion, rendered with the only intent of offering pleasure to him. Their dance was offered not to obtain anything in exchange, but for the only purpose to give pleasure to him. The Bhakti movement initiated by Chaitanya and brought forward by his followers places a lot of emphasis on forms of a spontaneous outburst of dance and music, rendered in complete abandon of any social conventions and directed towards a total absorption of the mind and body in the thoughts of the divine. The dances of the Vaishnavas, when overwhelmed by bliss during the singing of Namo Kirtana or Lila Kirtan, do not follow any rigid pattern, but are simply dictated by the frenzy of the music and the rhythm. The example of the selfless dedication to Krishna on the part of the Gopi of Vrindavan is the underlying concept for this type of manifestation of devotion. Although the dedication of the Mahari to a life of complete service to Jagannath was based on a similar principle, their rendering of dance and music was regulated by precise rules and strict observation of the Shastric tenets. Specific tala, raga, and technical instruction in relation of footwork and hasta mudra are found in manuscripts written or in possession of the Mahari themselves. Royal orders issued from time to time to regulate their service also mention that the dance at the time of the seva should adhere to Shastra rules, that there should be perfect coordination between the dancer and the instrumentalist, and the dance should be performed according to certain tala. The tala mentioned are Pahapata, 4 matra, Julla, 6 matra, Sarimana, 14 matra, and Akatali, 12 matras. Some of these tala are present in the rhythmic cadence of the bells and drums accompanying the Pahadi movement of Jagannath when he is being taken out in procession. The Shastra which the Mahari refers to as containing instruction relative to their dance technique are Devadasi Nrutya Paddhati by Narayan Mishra, Nachoni Bitti by Madhu Patnaik, Devadasi Nrutya Karika by Lavanya Mahari, and Niladrinacha by Mukta Mahari. The dance performed by the Mahari at the time of Sakala Dupa, segments of rhythmic dance nritta accompanied by Vatya Ukuta, rhythmic syllables, just played and not uttered by the Madeli or drummer, can be linked to the Nirgita section of the Purvaranga, as mentioned by Bharata in the Natya Shastra. This section is described as a ritualistic segment of dance which should be performed like a puja at the beginning of a play, without any songs, but accompanied only by the mnemonic syllables of the percussion instrument. The rhythmic sequence and Nritya Khanda at the time of Sakala Dupa were played one after the other without pause, and the dancer was exhibiting movements which were covering the space mostly in circular pattern. So my time is almost over. So I'll just conclude. The seva performed by the Mahari on the Chapa during the Chandan Jatra involved the singing and dancing to Oriya song belonged to the Vaishnava in the literature of the 16th century. We do not know which kind of songs were enacted before this and whether the promenade of the deities was part of the ritual from the very beginning or not. But one can presume that the art of Abhinaya may not have become known to them all of a sudden, and it must have been part of their training from earlier times. So the dances have survived, while the people who used to offer them to the deity have vanished. In the secular world outside the temple, the style of dance known as Odissi has been enriched by refinements and embellishment, and its popularity as performing act of entertainment has grown by day. But the sacred flavor imparted to it is the great contribution of the Mahari of Jagannath. Harapriya Devi once told me that all the people who were now proclaiming to have been the first just took of the Odissi dance what they saw, understood, experienced, or absorbed, and went away to sell it to the world. But it was like picking a flower and thinking of possessing its fragrance too. In the same way, like the prasad cooked at home never tasted the same as the one cooked in the temple. These dancers and dance masters, according to Harapriya Devi, may have taken away the outward structure of the dance, but not the core, because that belonged to the temple dancer and would die with the last of them. So I would like to conclude with this word by Harapriya Devi, and just adding that during the revival from the middle of the last century, when the dance was reconstructed and there was all the movement to make it as a classical, and there was hardly any interaction with the last of the Mahari which are existing. So this is probably explaining why this kind of sort of bitterness, or which Harapriya was telling, that everybody may have taken, thinking to have taken from us whatever they understood and expanding to the world, but the same flavor of the food cooked in the temple is not the same like the food cooked at home. Thank you very much.
So that was Dr. Ileana ji, Ileana Citaristi ji.